It was just after midnight on November 21st, 1970. A fleet of 28 American aircraft surged through the night sky above North Vietnam. Flying low and fast, they weren't headed to bomb a supply line or destroy enemy infrastructure. Their target was a prison. Inside that prison compound near the small town of Son Tay, 23 miles west of Hanoi, the United States believed dozens of American prisoners of war were being held in brutal conditions. For months, these men had been presumed lost in the chaos of the Vietnam War, forgotten by some, but not by the warriors who were coming to get them. What unfolded that night was one of the boldest rescue attempts in U.S. military history. Meticulously planned and flawlessly executed, it brought together the best of America's special forces and Air Force assets in a joint operation that pushed the limits of what was possible. And yet, when the dust settled, there were no prisoners to rescue. This is the story of Operation Ivory Coast, a mission where no one was saved, but everything was done right. A mission that would change the future of special operations forever. If you're into true stories of forgotten battles, elite soldiers, and covert operations most people have never heard of, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We uncover the missions history tried to bury, one operation at a time. By 1970, the Vietnam War had dragged on for years. It had started small, but slowly grew into a long and painful conflict. Thousands of young American soldiers had gone to fight, and many never came back. Families across the United States were waiting for news, hoping their sons, brothers, or husbands would return home. But some never did. They were missing in action. They were prisoners of war. North Vietnam was known for treating prisoners harshly. Reports of beatings, starvation, and terrible living conditions had started to reach the public. These stories shocked Americans and caused anger and sadness across the country. By mid-1970, U.S. intelligence agencies had strong evidence that a group of American POWs were being held at a place called Son Tay, just outside of Hanoi. Spy planes had taken pictures. The layout of the camp matched known prison designs. One photo even showed what looked like a prisoner drawing a message on the ground. The message was clear: we're still alive. This discovery created a sense of urgency. A rescue mission was risky, but doing nothing wasn't an option. The men at Son Tay had already suffered too much. Every day that passed meant more danger for them. The military began planning in total secrecy. Only a small group of people even knew the operation was being prepared. It had to be fast, quiet, and perfect. There would only be one chance. For the soldiers chosen to go in, the mission wasn't about winning the war. It was about something more personal. It was about bringing Americans home, alive. This was the moment Operation Ivory Coast was born. The plan to rescue the prisoners at Son Tay had to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes. The prison was deep inside North Vietnam, just 23 miles from the capital city of Hanoi. That meant the rescue team would have to fly far behind enemy lines, where enemy soldiers, radar systems, and anti-aircraft weapons were everywhere. The U.S. military chose two experienced leaders for the mission. One was Brigadier General Leroy Manor from the Air Force. He would take charge of all the planning and flying. The other was Colonel Arthur Bull Simons, a tough and respected officer from the Army Special Forces. He had fought in World War II and was known as a fearless and smart leader. Together, they built a team of experts from the Army and the Air Force. Their plan was bold. It would use helicopters to drop a small group of soldiers right into the prison. They would land so close they could surprise the guards and take control in minutes. After freeing the prisoners, they would all fly out quickly before North Vietnamese forces could react. But before anything could happen, the team needed training. And not just regular training. They had to practice every tiny detail until it became second nature. At a secret base in Florida, the military built a full-size model of the Son Tay prison camp. The soldiers practiced the mission over and over again, entering the compound, clearing rooms, finding the prisoners, and escaping. Pilots flew in tight formations at night, just like they would during the real mission. Security was extremely tight. Most people in the military didn't even know a raid was being planned. The mission was given the name Operation Ivory Coast to keep it secret. Even the rescue itself was daring. One of the helicopters, called Banana One, would crash land right in the middle of the prison courtyard. It was a planned crash. The pilot would land hard and fast to shock the guards. The Green Berets would jump out and start the fight before the enemy even had a chance to respond. Everything depended on speed and surprise. The plan was clear. Get in fast, kill the guards, free the prisoners, get everyone out in under 30 minutes. If it worked, it would be one of the greatest rescue missions in history. If it failed, the cost could be high. Many Americans could die, and the prisoners might be killed in revenge. But the team believed in the mission. They were ready. The men chosen for Operation Ivory Coast were some of the best soldiers in the world. They came from the U.S. Army's Green Berets and the U.S. Air Force's most skilled flight crews. In total, there were 56 Special Forces soldiers and 92 Air Force personnel involved in the mission. These men trained for weeks in complete secrecy. They were told only what they needed to know. Every man was hand-picked, not just for his skills, but for his ability to stay calm under pressure and work as a team. This wasn't a job for regular soldiers. This was a job for professionals who could operate behind enemy lines, think fast, and survive in the worst conditions. The Special Forces soldiers trained in fast attacks, room clearing, and night operations. The Air Force pilots practiced flying long distances at low altitudes, just a few hundred feet above the ground, to avoid enemy radar. Everyone had to know their role perfectly. The mission used 28 aircraft in total. This included HH-53 helicopters to carry the soldiers, A-1 Sky Raiders to provide air cover, MC-130 jets for navigation and refueling, F-4 Phantom jets to protect against enemy aircraft. It was one of the most complex air operations of the entire war. Despite coming from different military branches, the men worked together like one unit. They had to trust each other completely. Once the helicopters crossed into enemy airspace, there would be no turning back. They knew the risks, being shot down, captured, or killed, but they accepted them. Many of the soldiers wrote goodbye letters to their families before the mission, just in case they didn't make it home. These were the warriors in the shadows, quiet, focused, and deadly. They weren't looking for glory. They were looking to bring their fellow Americans home. They were ready. The night of November 21st, 1970, was moonless and dark. The mission was a go. After months of training and planning, Operation Ivory Coast was finally happening. The 28 aircraft involved took off from bases in Thailand and South Vietnam, flying low to the ground to stay hidden from enemy radar. The flight path was dangerous. The aircraft had to fly over hundreds of miles of enemy territory with no room for mistakes. If any of the planes or helicopters were spotted, the North Vietnamese could be ready to fight back before the raid even began. Every second mattered. The lead aircraft helped guide the others by using electronic systems. They flew in total darkness, just above the treetops. In the back of the helicopters, the Green Berets sat quietly, checking their weapons and gear one last time. They had trained for this moment for weeks. Now it was real. As they neared the target, the team split into different groups. Each group had a clear job to do. One would land inside the prison to take out the guards and rescue the POWs. Another would land outside to deal with enemy reinforcements. A third would secure the nearby area and cut off any escape routes. At exactly 2:18 a.m., the helicopter Banana 1 crash-landed right inside the prison courtyard. This was part of the plan. The pilot dropped fast and hard, surprising the guards and giving the soldiers a few precious seconds of advantage. The Green Berets jumped out and began their assault. They moved quickly through the compound, clearing buildings, kicking down doors, and searching for the prisoners. The other groups landed nearby and began their missions, hitting enemy targets with speed and precision. Everything was going smoothly. But then, something strange happened. Room after room was empty. There were no prisoners, no Americans, just a few guards, some North Vietnamese troops, and something even more confusing: mannequins, fake human figures used for training. Colonel Bull Simons made a quick call. The truth became clear. The intelligence was wrong. The American POWs were no longer at Son Tay. They had been moved to another prison months earlier, but nobody had known. It was a crushing moment. After all the planning, all the training, all the risk, the camp was empty. But even in disappointment, the soldiers stayed focused. They followed their backup plan and moved quickly to their extraction points. They couldn't afford to wait. North Vietnamese troops from nearby bases were already starting to respond. The air support team and the A-1 Sky Raiders and 4-4 Phantom jets provided cover, making sure the helicopters could take off without being attacked. The rescue force was back in the air within 26 minutes of landing. Despite the failed objective, the mission was a technical success. Not a single soldier was killed. Only 2 men were lightly wounded. The operation went exactly as planned, except for the part that couldn't be controlled. The prisoners were gone. The pilots and soldiers flew back to base, tired and quiet. They had just pulled off one of the most daring raids in military history and found nothing. Some of the men cried. Others sat in silence. They had done everything right. They had risked their lives, but it hadn't been enough. Still, deep down, they knew this mission was bigger than just the rescue. They had sent a message. The United States had not forgotten its prisoners, and the people who held them now knew. America was willing to go anywhere, do anything, and risk everything to bring its men home. As the soldiers cleared the last rooms inside the Son Tay prison, the truth hit hard. There were no prisoners. The men they had come to save, the reason they had trained for weeks and risked their lives, were not there. The prison was completely empty. The only people inside were enemy guards and a few training dummies used for drills. No Americans. No voices calling out. Just silence. It didn't take long for Colonel Simons and the other leaders to realize what had happened. The intelligence they had received months earlier had been accurate at the time, but it was now out of date. The prisoners had been moved to another location, probably for security or to avoid bombing raids. Sadly, nobody in the U.S. had known. The team had flown deep into enemy territory, fought their way into the camp, and completed every part of the mission with skill and bravery. But the prisoners were gone. It felt like a punch to the gut. Still, the soldiers stayed professional. They didn't panic. They didn't complain. They simply moved on to the next part of the plan. Within minutes, they were moving back to their helicopters and preparing for extraction. North Vietnamese troops were beginning to respond, but they were too late. American aircraft provided cover from above, and all the helicopters lifted off safely. In just 26 minutes, the entire ground team was back in the air and heading home. It was one of the fastest and most efficient raids ever carried out by U.S. forces. And yet, emotionally, it was one of the hardest. The mission had not failed because of the men involved. They had done everything right. The failure came from something no one could control. The simple fact that the prisoners had been moved. The camp was real. The rescue plan was solid. The soldiers were ready. But Son Tay had become a ghost prison. When news of the Son Tay Raid reached the public, the reaction was mixed. Some people were confused. How could the U.S. military launch such a daring rescue mission and not find a single prisoner? Others were proud. They saw it as a message. America had not forgotten its men, and it was willing to risk everything to bring them home. Inside the military, there was no doubt. Operation Ivory Coast was considered a success in everything but its main goal. The planning, teamwork, and execution had been nearly perfect. The soldiers had flown deep into enemy territory, completed their mission under fire, and made it back alive, all without losing a single man. But the mission also revealed a big problem: bad intelligence. The prisoners had been moved months before the raid, but the U.S. had no idea. This failure led to changes in how the military and intelligence agencies worked together. They began looking for better ways to share information and improve their methods. This mission helped spark changes that would shape how future operations were planned. There was also an unexpected result. After the raid, the North Vietnamese became nervous. They realized how close American forces had come to reaching their secret prisons. In response, they moved all the remaining POWs into a few large, central prisons in Hanoi. While this wasn't their intention, it actually improved conditions for many American prisoners. They were no longer held in remote camps, cut off from others. Now they could talk, support each other, and share news. Some POWs later said that hearing about the raid gave them hope. Even though they hadn't been rescued, they knew that someone had tried. That meant the outside world still cared, and that gave them strength to keep going. In the end, Operation Ivory Coast didn't bring anyone home that night, but it proved something powerful. America never stops looking for its own. Operation Ivory Coast became more than just a failed rescue mission. It became a model for the future. Even though no prisoners were found, military leaders saw how well the operation was planned and carried out. It showed the value of joint operations, where different branches of the military, like the Army and Air Force, worked together toward one mission. This was rare at the time. Before Son Tay, each branch mostly operated on its own. But after seeing what was possible when they trained and fought as one team, the U.S. military began building new units and new systems for special missions. The raid helped lead to the creation of top-tier groups like Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and U.S. Special Operations Command, SOCOM. Teams built for fast, secret, and highly dangerous missions all over the world. It also taught important lessons about the need for better intelligence and communication. No matter how good the soldiers are, a mission can fail if the information is wrong. But above all, the Son Tay Raid showed something deeper. It showed that the U.S. would not forget its captured soldiers, and that it was willing to go to extreme lengths to bring them home. The men who carried out the raid never saw it as a failure. They had trained hard, risked their lives, and done their jobs with courage and honor. For them, it wasn't about success or failure. It was about doing the right thing. Operation Ivory Coast will always be remembered as one of the most daring missions of the Vietnam War. Not because it brought prisoners home, but because of the courage it took to try. 56 Green Berets and dozens of Air Force pilots flew deep into enemy territory, knowing they might not return. They risked everything for men they had never met, fellow Americans who had suffered in silence for too long. The raid didn't succeed in its main goal, but it sent a clear message to the world. The United States does not leave its people behind. For the prisoners still in North Vietnam, the mission brought hope. They knew someone had tried. They knew they were not forgotten. That knowledge helped many of them survive until the war ended. The Son Tay Raid changed the way special operations were done. It shaped the future of elite military units and proved what could be achieved with training, teamwork, and bravery. It was a mission carried out in the shadows, fast, silent, and gone in under 30 minutes. But the story of what happened that night still lives on, and it always will.